Ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special guest joining me today. Someone I looked up to as a kid, someone I followed throughout my whole life. A lot of big sports moments. I've seen him report it. He's a special guy to me. Everybody knows him. If you see the face, you know who he is. He's Fox Sports' first three-sport star. Currently contributes to Fox coverage of NFL, NASCAR, MLB, PBC, and of course the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. He does a little bit of everything. Emmy Award-winning Chris Myers. What's going on, Chris? How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the kind words. Good to finally get to talk to you.
Of course, yeah. I know going back and forth on social media for a while is good to kindly you do it face to face,
Yeah. Social media's been great that way. I mean, the advancement of that, the communication, the way to connect with people, and certainly in the sports world with athletes, coaches, et cetera. It's really been it's a whole new frontier, so to speak, from when I was growing up, where it was, ESPN, cable television, then the network TV like Fox. And so now there's a lot of options.
It definitely is. I think it's different. I mean, for you, you've been around for a while. What do you think about it? Do you think it's great the way it's headed as far as like social media and news being spread so quick? Like, what do you think? What do you think about it? Obviously,
yeah. Well, I like that. I mean, I like that you're getting information faster. What concerns me a little bit is where, excuse me, where the sources are coming from and who's reporting them. And so there is a lot of people just, some is comical, some are parodies, some are, and so you have to distinguish. You also have to determine whether somebody has an agenda with what they're reporting or saying, or whether somebody's just trying to do something for effect. I mean, those are some concerns. But from a fun social media connection, from an extension of talking on the telephone, from communicating even before call-in radio shows, that type of thing, it's advanced. I think a lot of people to talk about in sports are just like, our passion here, what we love, and what we don't like is to connect with athletes, to hear from them directly, so they don't have to go through an interview or some kind of a sports writer or that type of thing, which was the way that it only was. And I was thinking about this morning when I first was working at ESPN in the 90s, which I call the golden years, the growth of that network, and just like going to Fox in 2000 when they added beyond the NFL, getting other sports and continuing to grow that network. That think about ESPN though, it was the only game in town in terms of all the sports. There was no NFL network or MLB network or a tennis channel or a golf channel. It's unbelievable. ACC network. So really, other than your local stations, in terms of television or information, then radio, whatever, that's where you can only get. It was there. And then ESPN expanded channels and other networks that eat sports teams, sports leagues grew. So it's I guess what I'm saying is a great time to be a sports fan, and from a chance to express yourself as a viewer, as a fan, as a listener, the podcast, social media, a lot of opportunities to do that. So it's a really good time.
Definitely. So, originally I wanted to meet with you because of the book. The book came out in November, and just because of scheduling, we finally got a chance to sit down. But many people, if you don't know, Chris released a book called That Deserves a While, and that was one of his slogans on ESPN Sports Center whenever he saw a big highlight. So one of the first questions I want to ask you, what inspired you to write the book, especially at this point in your career? Because you've been around for a while, and many people would think it would be sooner, but why now? Why was now the perfect time?
Yeah, I think I started to keep some notes during the pandemic, which I hate bringing that up, but that stretch with sports, the world stood still, right? Things were far more serious than fun and games. But I started thinking about, wow, what if we don't get back to doing the things we like? I mean, and then even calling a Viking Packer game with nobody in the stands. I mean, it just even, so anyway, that's where it started. And then HarperCollins, some people approached me there with the Fed agency about, hey, not only have you covered Super Bowls, World Series, but you were at some unique places in sports, and some unique things happen in your life along the way that maybe we want to know how it affected your reporting. And so that's I wanted to write so people, I could share experience. If you heard about the O.J. Simpson interview, or you remember the Red Sox, breaking through with their curse, or, Mahomes' first Super Bowl win as a Chief, and moments that was a Brady's great comeback, and then the earthquake World Series and the Olympic bombing in Atlanta. So, and then in my own life interspersing. I didn't want to make it all about me, but there are some things that I express in there that I think help people understand how you report in certain situations and why you report the things you do. And even in handling tough interviews, from my first interview with Muhammad Ali to Mike Tyson wanting to beat me up to players through the years, Bonds, Trout, whatever, whoever you want to talk to. I've been fortunate enough over the last 3 or 4 decades, even starting it as a teenager, to have interviewed a lot of the people that have shaped our some of the best people, Wilt Chamberlain to Jordan. I mean, it's unbelievable. Kobe, you think about different people in different sports, from Nicholas to Tiger, et cetera, Elway, Montana. So that's, I wanted to share that with people, but I hope they're inspired by the book, because it was a dream of mine as a kid, and it really can happen if you really work at it and get some breaks and want it to happen.
Definitely. You definitely covered everything as far as like the book, reading the book the first time, like the stories you shared, especially if anybody's followed you during your career, like kind of learning some of these backstories. Like you mentioned, the OJ interview, the Mike Tyson interview, that story was kind of like eye-opening to hear it. Like, yo, for real, that really happened. I didn't even realize the depth of that. That was a crazy situation. And learning about everything else. What was the most difficult part about writing this book for you, would you say?
Well,
was anything difficult about it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say it was hard because I'm a sports. I wrote for when I did shows, whether I was hosting or reporting. Really, you keep notes, it's information. So I'm not a literary writer. I mean, some of that you took some of those classes in school. But I think shaping that, and I had a guy named Travis Thrasher, who was a very good ghostwriter, researcher, and I could tell some stories on a Zoom and write some notes. And the hard part was shaping where are we going to put this so that it's a comfortable read for viewers, or excuse me, readers. And then he would go back where stuff was on television, and he could double check my facts and information about what I said at the time, and then I could expound on what I was thinking when you saw this interview or this happened in a certain sporting event at either ESPN or Fox, through those a decade there and then 20 at Fox. So that was the hard part, I think, just shaping it. And I wanted to make it sound like I was talking and telling people, like I was reporting. I didn't want it to be like homework for someone. I mean, sports is usually fun, but there's some tragedy involved in sports sometimes. There's ups and downs, and a lot of athletes talk about overcoming things, and that's kind of what it was about. So that was the challenge. I think just kind of shaping it so it was under 300 pages and putting the right chapters. I had to leave some things out, some great stories and experiences, just because they couldn't fit them all in. But those could be in another book. And the audiobook, by the way, is something that's doing very well. People seem to really enjoy that. It was my voice on it, obviously, which was fun to do. That was a little bit of a challenge, though, just the amount of hours you got to commit to reading the way you would talk, which was a lot of fun, actually. But
Definitely.
there were a lot of challenges, because it's something I had not done much. I had radio, TV, and a lot of different things in sports television, but writing a book is a little bit more intense, I'd say.
I bet it is. Like, I know for me, one of the best stories I like was learning early on when you was at WKAT in Miami, your first assignment, Sunny Central, your first assignment to go to the Fontainebleau to talk to Muhammad Ali. I know that's like somebody's like bucket list, and you got to do that as a teenager. Like, that was just crazy. And then you kind of went in there, you weren't intimidated, and you asked the question about, was George Foreman the toughest fight? And then you walked out there, and I love the quote in which you said, it was kind of like, I have it here. It was like, it's like looking at the vast Atlantic Ocean for the first time and feeling right at home. Could you describe that feeling like Muhammad Ali,
It was, as a kid growing up in Miami, I spent a lot of time at the beach after school, and obviously when I wasn't listening to sports talk radio or watching sports. But yeah, I was leaving my high school class. I think it was out of humanities, and got the call. Sonny Hurst, the sports director, and I had been working behind the scenes, but wanted me to take the tape recorder and go do the interview. So I got into the room, and I was just, I knew Ali was the greatest fighter at that time. We're talking the end of the 70s there, and but I didn't realize the magnitude of this personality and the kind of person he was, the world appeal that he had. So anyway, I was a little nervous, but I remember a line from a movie and something that I used later for interviews about treat the famous guy like a regular guy and a regular guy like a famous guy. And I like that, because you don't get intimidated by anybody, and also you don't overlook anybody who might not yet be a star or as important publicly, but they have a story to tell, and they're interesting and deserve that time. So I got my questions in, but just that, the ocean is wide open and powerful. It can be stormy, it can be calm, it can be fun. That's a kind of a metaphor in terms of swimming in it is fun, it's relaxing. A day at the beach means a lot to me. The Atlantic Ocean is powerful. It's wide open. And then after that interview, I thought, wow, there's where else do you go? There's a lot of interviews, and I
Right.
hope I have many more, and hope I can handle them. Especially after Ali, who spun some humorous line and worked the room like he usually does. So that's kind of what I was trying to attach that to that memory as a young teenager who had done really one of his first interview opportunities, but then would go on to do more.
Now you did a good job at talking about it because you talked about watching him control a room like a warrior controlling a room, and how he was, how entertaining he was, and even joking with you and telling, "Hey, kids, you're not as dumb as you look," and and just kind of like he didn't realize you were you were a little bit older than he gave you credit for, but that was pretty awesome. Also, too, I know a lot of people. If you read the book, Sonny Hirsch was a sports director. How important was he to your career? Because we always know people will get opportunities, but having somebody like Sonny that kind of puts you out there early on. How vital was that to your career, you'd say?
Yeah, and he was later the voice of the Miami Hurricanes football team in their great years in basketball. And it was just a 2-hour small radio station in Miami,
Yeah.
talk show, but he was the sports director and he was the host. And I would call in, as a kid. That's a deep voice. That's how I kind of got to get on the air. I get
Duke from North Miami, right?
Yeah, that's it, right? And so, but he was. I think he just, I was kind of like a pest who wouldn't go away. So it's like, where can we put this kid? And John Harper, a guy behind the scenes, the producer, was like, well, he could work weekends here. He knows a lot about sports. He could help us out, with preparing shows or interviews or that type of thing. And so it was even before I got into college and internships. But it was important, yes, to have somebody there. Because there are a lot of people who have, I think, a lot of ability, and they just don't get that break. Somebody doesn't notice them, or they don't have a place they can put them. And that was really my, in terms of coming from a big family, that type of thing. I don't know if sports was either my escape, my passion, whatever. I played a little bit, but that was not my thing. I wanted to talk to people and listen and interview those who played. So, yeah, it was important to have. But I think if you're passionate and you're authentic and you work hard, people will notice and somehow find a place for you to get that opportunity. And then I took it and ran.
Yeah, you definitely did. So you were there for a little bit, became sports director at 19, which is a huge accomplishment. This it's a testament to how hard you worked at an early young age. Stayed there, went to New Orleans, WWL TV, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yep.
82, yep. And then you stayed there to 88, and you made the jump to the big dance, as people want to say it. I'm jumping around here because I know our time is very limited, so I want to get to the to the real meat and potatoes of everything. So you got the ESPN. What was at the time? Obviously, as you said, it was the mothership, right? I think Dan Patrick describes it as such. It was everything as far as sports content and sports news. What was that like? What was that like going up there, going from New Orleans at WWL TV, going up to Connecticut to ESPN, or being a part of that brand, I should say, during the golden time, as I've seen you describe it in most recent interviews.
Yeah, well, it was great because it was like the Wild West in terms of sports. We could do a lot of creative things. We could take some chances. There were enough people watching that we were growing and becoming important at that time.
Right.
But we weren't so established that people were going to just tear it apart if somebody tried something that didn't work. In fact, I mentioned in the book I was the first West Coast reporter, so I was out in L.A. and I had to cover whether it was the Lakers, the Dodgers, but then because they didn't have enough people, I flew to Dallas when Jerry Jones bought the team and Jimmy Johnson was hired. They drafted Aikman, so those were areas I covered. But I was doing baseball. I think it was Frank Robinson and I said, I was trying to get into the press conference as a reporter, and I said, you have a moment for ESPN, and he said, what's that? Is that one of those Spanish channels? And everybody kind of laughed. So, and soon after that, it didn't take long, after many years, but that just shows you that people didn't remember. We weren't as well known, but once it started to grow, then hey, I'm with ESPN. They opened the door. They let everybody, a manager, a coach, a player, a team, wanted, because the exposure was there, the 24-hour sports channel. So that was just an example of that. But I was really grateful to ESPN because I was a reporter, won an Emmy there. I got to host Sports Center, work with people like Linda Cohn and Mike Tirico, and going back through the years of a lot of really fun, good people, talented people, and then do Up Close, the interview show where Roy Firestone established. But that was back in Los Angeles, where I had wanted to live out in California. But for the time that I was there in that decade, it went fast. I mean, there was a lot of growth for the network and myself, but there were opportunities to get to do a lot of different things, so it was like really big and like a sports playpen with a lot of even behind the scenes There were so many people who were creative and came up with ideas and helped to make whether it was Sports Center or whatever interviews we did to make it successful. So and it was unique because you can't capture that again. I mean, once there was an ESPN2 and an ESPNU and the growth and the change in ownership, then certain philosophies change, and it's still ESPN. It's still your 24-hour sports network. It's just now, as I mentioned, there's all this competition, and people get to see other points of view.
Different levels of management as well. You guys had a who's who, right? Dan Patrick, Chris Berman, Mike Tirico, like you mentioned, Linda Cohn, Bob Lee, and Craig Kilborn. I couldn't imagine like the talent.
Carl Ravitch. Yeah, Carl Ravitch was there. Yeah, Chris Berman was kind of the lead guy. Him and Bob Lee. It was great because they were really they were the originals, or at least close to the first day of the operation. And Berman was the fun Sports Center highlight guy, and Bob Lee was kind of the journalist sports guy that he loved sports, but he knew there was a newsy side to it, and I think that set the tone. I mean, you talk about all the different Sports Center hosts. Charlie Steiner was on there, and there so many others that kind of went through before and after me, and the machine kept rolling. But that was the best time. Those were the pillars of that network. Bob Lee and Chris Berman.
Yeah, you mentioned Up Close. Obviously, doing a research, so you did over about 1,000 interviews. So it was like every day was something new with Up Close. Obviously, we all know about the OJ interview. A few others. I totally forgot about the Mark Gastineau interview. What was your best and what was your worst interview on Up Close? What would you say?
Well, I would say I don't know. It's a tough question because we had in 4 years so many different people, and it was great. We would go on the road to certain events sometimes at the Masters, or we'd take the show to a Super Bowl and do interviews. And they were all fun. I mean, I had some crazy. Mark Gastineau was probably, we'd say, the worst. That was the most challenging interview because I thought he was a terrific player and had an interesting story, and then I explained that how that went kind of haywire. I was just glad he was okay, and it ended up being kind of an entertaining thing, but you felt bad. I would say the best. OJ was probably the most famous one because it got people to watch. It was the first live interview with him after both of the trials, and he wanted to come on because he thought I was fair with athletes. And I just said that, his requirement, I said, I got to ask whatever I want to ask. You can't restrict. And he said, no, this woman is and it had to be live. That was the type of thing. So we agreed to that. So that was famous, but that was intense, and that was not as much a sports interview. But that got headlines on Howard Stern and the Tonight Show, and it was incredibly high-rated show. I had some really deep. Jose Canseco was a good at a different time and a neat time in his career. If you go back historically, through George Foreman was on and was a great guy. May he rest in peace. I know recently, but just a guy who could win a title at a young age and then come back and 20 years later get back and do what he did, and had a great personality. I loved his line about when I named him, why did he name all his kids George, the second. He just said, because if I forget their names, I could just yell George and I know they'll all come running.
Got you.
Yeah, those guys. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain was a fun, and Kobe Bryant. Those were a couple of other. I'm just trying to go through my head in different sports. Eddie Quarterback was great to interview, from Montana to Elway to Marino to Aikman, as players. Charles Barkley, though, probably one of my favorites. Before we even knew he'd become a broadcaster, you could tell at the end of his playing career that he had this great skill. So he'd probably have to be, one of the most fun for me, along with Bill Murray, who would come on every once in a while as well. He wrote the foreword to the book.
He actually one of your good friends. You guys got really close at the ESPYs in '94, right?
Yeah. We developed comes from a big family, a sense of humor. I come from a big family, sense of humor. He's obviously, a sports fan. I like sports. I liked his, the way his style is very different. He's a very, very interesting person, kind of guy you'd want to hang out with, even if he wasn't famous. But yeah, through the years, he's been a guy, who's kind of given me a few pointers on some things. It helped me with the OJ interview and some other situations about dealing with people in sports.
Seems like a big deal. Seems like a really good dude. Your time at ESPN, I think when we talked about it last week, some of my the most notable moments that I remember. I remember being a kid, you covering the earthquake in '89.
Right.
Hank Gather's death. You were at the movie theater with your wife at the time. Not at the time with your wife. I believe you were married at the time. I believe when that happened.
Yeah. For the Hank Gather's day was Lee. I left the movie theater to rush to see what happened to meet at the hospital from when he collapsed at the arena. Yeah, Hank Gather's with Loyola Marymount. Yep.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember the that was the Atlanta bombing. That was
96. Yeah,
96, and then of course.
at Fox, the 2001, the Dale Earnhardt, our broadcast
Yeah.
on the pre and post race show of the Daytona 500. The face of the sport dying, driving his his race car. So yeah, those are the ones that are, you're in the middle of, you're there for sports, and you study and prepare for that, and then news breaks, and then you can't just walk away. You got to stay on the air, and you got to deliver the information to the people, whether you're a reporter on the ground, as I was in some of those cases, or
Yeah.
the broadcaster in the booth, the pre-show or post-show, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, and then you fall back on some of the things you just learned along the way. Be as accurate as you can, as quickly as you can, and also be sensitive to the situation, but not over dramatize or scare people. Like in the Olympic bombing situation, we thought there were more bombs, but we had to be careful about, at least the terror watch was out. About how you present those kinds of things. Just like the earthquake, we knew where we were between the Giants and the A's at the moment, but we didn't realize the damage that was far-reaching when we first went on the air. So yeah, those were that I talked more a little bit about some of those things throughout that. But yeah, you can't. It's a little Forrest Gump like. You can't just, you can go to a plan to cover a World Series or Super Bowl, but some of these other events, you can't expect that they're going to happen or why you're placed there. But when you are, you have to handle it.
And everything you've done, you've always kind of had like a Walter Cronkite approach. Because, when he announced Kennedy's passing and Dr. King's passing, he was very even killed, right? A lot of times, like you say, you can't get too high. You kind of got to stay even. Is that just something you've learned through the years, or that's something that's really taught early on? Like you have to keep emotion out of things when you report it and remain professional for the camera at all times. You're not professional, but you know what I mean.
And I appreciate you even mentioning, my name in that area, because those are news guys, and in sports, we usually like to have fun, and my sense of humor, I like to make light of things. But in those spots, yeah, you really can't overreact, and you have to be calm, but you have to feel the moment as realistically as you can. And I guess that, I guess that comes from just being around people and caring what people have to say, and listening to people in interviews over the years, just being sensitive to them. But also, I always tried to put myself, because I was there, and I still am, as a member of the viewing audience. What when I'm watching, what do I want to know? How do I want a reporter screaming or panicking? No, but I want a sense of urgency, and I want a sense of reality. So that, I guess over the years, starting at a young age and being in some situations, you hope, and I know I could always have done better in certain spots, but you hope you learn something along the way. And even if, the file in your head is flipping through all these things on the air, you have to present the information as I guess, carefully and respectfully as you can.
Got it. So you started ESPN in '98. You made the difficult decision to go ahead and join Fox's team. I'm sure that was difficult because after 10 years of being with the network, it becomes kind of like family, the same people you used to seeing day in and day out. So you go to Fox as it's in its early stages of Fox Sports, right? You said something I saw. It was football, and it was The Simpsons, and it was something else on the network. It was kind of it really wasn't what it is now. Was this something? Did you give a lot of thought to that about staying at ESPN, or the way the negotiations were handled? Was that something like, okay, I think I need to just go forward, if that's okay with you discussing?
Yeah, no, sure. I thought I'd stay at ESPN for 20, 30 years. I mean,
Right.
I really, because I'm like, wow, if I like sports, this is the place to be. But again, there wasn't the place like Fox that they added baseball and NASCAR and college football. And they were growing. And they were a network, and there was an opportunity to be the broadcaster on a Super Bowl and at a World Series, as opposed to, I covered those things before, but not the network carrying the game. And so that was one of the main factors. There were other factors. It wasn't all about money, or it was about opportunity, I think, and about living. We were doing the Up Close show on the West Coast, and about staying out in California. I mean, at that point, my kids, even though they were born in Connecticut, were growing up. My two sons in Southern California were so this was an area I kind of wanted to keep them as they were starting to get into school. So there were a number of factors, but no, it was a very difficult decision. I was flattered that Fox was interested. I really wasn't going to jump at it, but the more we talked about it, and the more I examined the reality of certain situation, the things that were guaranteed or not guaranteed, it was the right move. I'm glad that I made it when I did. I mean, I certainly am thankful at ESPN for the time and missed working there. But as Fox grew, the fact that I've been able to be a part of 5 or 6 Super Bowl network broadcasts and 4 or 5 World Series, along with MLB playoffs, and to call NFL games which is really one of the, other than doing an interview show, one of the most enjoyable things that I like to do. But then the opportunity to host, with the auto NASCAR, and work with some great personalities to help people enjoy that sport a little bit more, and to do whatever really Fox kind of needed me to do as they grew and continue to grow now as one of the top sports channels. Now Fox FS1, adding that too was another element as well.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like you got a chance to spread your wings. Obviously, you do a little bit of everything. MLB, even PBC. You've done a little bit, even a dog show. So one question I had, I know we're running low on time. I was wanting to ask, what's the preparation like? Is it the same for every sport? You just obviously doing, you're talking about something different. MLB, NFL. You're talking about different players, different stats. The NASCAR and the dog shows. The preparation the same, or is it different for every sport?
Yeah, no, and I think it's the same when you have people like Kenny Albert, who I certainly admire. There are quite a few others, and he can go from baseball to football to hockey to box. But he's doing all play-by-play, right? So that's the same. So that preparation is kind of the same. It's just the sports change. What I've been doing through the years is I'll do some play-by-play, but I'll do some studio hosting, and I'll do some sideline reporting, and I'll do some interviews. So that's where the preparation is a little bit different for each situation. Obviously play-by-play, you got to learn the roster, the stats, the numbers, and for that particular game, you're doing a show, either a football show or even a NASCAR, whatever. It's a wider view, and you're playing off your analysts, so there's more personality involved as opposed to the game being the direct thing at the moment. When you're sideline reporting, it's very little airtime. It's a lot of extra work, but it's information that has to fit into a window and play off the broadcast. So but I will say the technology has allowed the preparation to be a little bit more accessible, so you can do more of it. But the way I've always been able to do it through the years, and I learned this doing just sports talk radio when I was younger, was just compartmentalize. So when there are certain seasons, and of course they overlap, but if I'm assigned to do a football game, then I'm zeroing in on that. And if it's baseball the next week, or hockey, or whatever whatever they put me on, NASCAR, but you block everything else out, and you funnel in on that as you get closer to actually calling that event. And I like that as a sports fan. Year round, I think I'd be bored if I just did one thing. I mean, I think, and that keeps the energy up, and it keeps you fresh. I mean, we've had guys through the years like Al Michaels or Bob Costas who were really good at that. Whatever event they did, Olympics, they did it well. And I think that's one of the things, having interviewed those guys and met them through the years, I was able to learn a lot from guys like that.
I've always wondered what that was like, because I'm like, you guys do everything. It's just like, do you keep the same routine? That's something, again, just watching sports, seeing things. Like, what is it like for you? So,
but it is a good point. It goes back, John, to your study habits at a young age. So that if you said go do, obviously it wouldn't be as comfortable because I didn't, if you said go do a show on the housing market or whatever, and a financial, I wouldn't have the background and experience that I do in other sports. But you would apply similar study habits in terms of preparation. So at least you had a chance of doing a good job. So those are things that I think we have in our field that you can apply almost in any job.
Yeah. Well, look, man, I know your time is short, but I want to just ask you one last question. Is anything left on your list? I mean, you've been around, you've done a little bit of everything. I mean, what could possibly be left? Like, I know because of network contractual obligations, you can't do certain events, but is there anything you would love to do or cover that you haven't covered? And is there an interview left that you wish you can still do?
Yeah, no, I like the sports that I'm covering, and I like, obviously, the network I'm at because of that, because we have such opportunity. In terms of interviews, I probably, that is the thing, whether I do a podcast or more social media, that's that's the next area of doing more, expanding, at least for me personally, but in terms of covering sports. But in interviews, I wish Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, I'd really love to sit down with them and spend a little more time in a lengthy open air interview kind of thing. When I say open air, I'm not going to ask them a lot of tough questions, but just I want people to get to know them a little bit more. I'd like to know them a little bit more, having admired. But I understand shy people that are guarded. They have certain images and protection. But those are two guys that, in terms of I briefly have interviewed them, but I would love that opportunity again at some point. And I think people really appreciate it, even though they're not active or as active as they once were, as great as they were, and they're interested interesting lives and how they've been successful at other things, I think would be interesting for all of us to observe. But no, it's still fun. I mean, this is there are new challenges every week. Every night's the Super Bowl. That's always been my corny slogan, to make sure that I try to give my all to every event, and so that's what keeps it fun for me. So I'm sure whatever else might come my way, hopefully I'll be able to tackle it.
Well, I want to end it on this. Today was one of my Super Bowls. I definitely appreciate you as a bucket list. As I told you, looking at you as a 10-year-old with my granddad when Bonds got his record-setting deal, and kind of looking back how far baseball's come. Like, all my memories, a lot of my memories come from you. And thank you for making this average guy feel like a famous guy today. I really appreciate that. You've always been great to me since we've been communicating. Thanks for keeping your promise today. And I hope, sometime down the line we can do something again. I definitely appreciate this, Chris. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Jamal. Well, you are famous because we're getting to do an interview, and that's how I found you on social media. And I'd like to, it'd be nice to meet you in person one day too. But I appreciate your approach to sports and your love for what's happened in the past of sports and what's currently going on. So I'm glad you found a vehicle or an opportunity, and hopefully you'll have more of those. But I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for mentioning the book and taking the time to read it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. If you're ever in New York again, let me know. I'd love to come down to the city and meet you. Okay.
All right, you got it. That's a
all right.